Hi, and welcome back to the Because She's Adopted podcast. I'm Kristal Park.
And I'm Kristal Redpath.
Today we have two very special guests who are coming to share their story of resilience and survival. Nadine McSpaddan is an author, a retired teacher, an Indigenous consultant for Lenpierre Consulting, and a survivor of the 60s Scoop.
Tina Taphouse is an Interior Salish 60s Scoop survivor. She's a presenter, she's a photographer, she's a designer, and she's a storyteller.
Today we're focusing on what the 60s Scoop was and how it impacted Indigenous communities.
We do want to offer a trigger warning as we're going to be discussing some sensitive topics, but we are looking forward to diving into their stories and what they have to share.
Hello, Kristal.
Hello, Kristal.
I am so excited about today's episode. How about you?
I am too. Yeah. I'm really excited.
Yeah. So we have the pleasure of having Nadine McSpaddan and Tina Taphouse with us today, both 60 Scoop survivors. They have come to share their stories and share their knowledge with us. And we are just so grateful and honored to have both of you here today. And thank you so much for trusting us. And we were talking last night because they're staying in my fifth wheel at my house.
Yeah.
And I said, were you at any point thinking that you were going to come up here and and maybe I wasn't real, or did you have any worries at all? But no. We did have a little quick Zoom with one another first, but we are new friends.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for having us. It was an adventure coming up on our own to be out in nature and to meet some people. So thank you very much for having us today, sharing your special day with us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask both of you if you would just, Nadine, why don't you go first and just share who you are, maybe what you've done through your life, how you're connected to your community, and maybe don't go right into your full story, but just introduce yourself and.
Okay, so Waik Kawaiatip and Shinnin Squaws, Nadine McSpaddan. So I've taken me a long time to learn that, but that is hello. I am Nadine McSpaddan, and I'm from the Secwepemc Nation. And my home community is the Shuswap Band in Radium or Invermere, BC. And yeah, I am a 60 Scoop survivor. Didn't meet my birth mom, but managed to meet my Uncle Ox. And I texted him this morning, so he knows I'm here. A lot of my family and friends know I'm here, and I think they're excited that Tina and I are doing this work. I have lots of teacher friends too, and we have lots of connections in the 60 Scoop community, I think, who are excited and for us, and that this message is getting out there. So I thank you, Kristal, for providing this opportunity for us to finally have a forum to talk about this, because there has been no forum for us before. And so I think this is going to be kind of a cleansing and a healing process. I know it is for myself. And I think I can rest easy after this work is done, because I've done my work. I've shared my story.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Well said. Tina?
Hi, my name is Tina Taphouse. I'm Interior Salish. I'm from Statistimeck Territory in Lillooet, and I'm also a 60 Scoop survivor. I have had the privilege of meeting both my mother and father. And I've learned that my ancestors gave us a voice to be here today to talk about our stories, the history, and as Nadine said, this is also a form of healing and cleansing. Every time we talk about it, no matter how hard it is, it's a healing. So every tear we shed today, it's a form of healing. So Thank you very much for having us here today. It's my honor and privilege to be here with everybody that's here.
Thank you.
Macau.
Thank you.
And Kristal, I wanted to mention something too to both of you. It's interesting that this is a video podcast. I was talking to you in the car that as a teacher, right, one of my roles has been teaching teachers about Indigenous pedagogy. And the fact that this is going to be an audio podcast rather than a book, it just mirrors how we shared knowledge traditionally. So you have, I don't know if you even know that you have created story and you're using human voice rather than print, which is such an Indigenous forum. So I thank you for that, and I think it makes it safe for both of us to do that. So I think there's so many things we do as 60 Scoop survivors or children of survivors that we don't know why we do. And I think it's blood memory, or it's just teachings that are part of our DNA. So the fact that you gravitated to an oral story is just so amazing to me.
Thank you. I don't know how I'm going to get through this today. Oh my goodness. The emotion. Ooh.
What's coming up for you right now?
To be recognized.
And Kristal, don't you think, and Tina, isn't that something that I think all adoptees have sought our whole lives is recognition and
to be heard.
Yeah. Because I think as adoptees and children of adoptees, you're made to kind of feel like you should be super grateful. But yeah, I think it's important you understand that there's so much a part of you that even though all of us, we didn't grow up in our communities, there's so much connection that. So I think this is truly just the jumping off part of your journey. I see incredible things in your future. I see you helping others. Like, I don't think you know how much this is going to help Tina and I. I don't think you'll know the impact. And my family, when they see this for the first time. My uncle said when I told him I was doing this, he was a residential school survivor, and he still carries a lot of anger. And he says, you go tell them our side of the story. Right. So you're giving him voice too. So, yeah.
Thank you, Nadine. I think what created all the emotion in me was to be recognized as a real Indigenous.
Mm-hmm. I said the three of us gave us voices to be here today, to be connected today, and to talk today, that our ancestors guided us towards this moment to talk.
And in the smudging, my prayers for all of us in this group was that we did this work in a good way, and that we got the strength we needed to do this work.
Yeah.
So we have to feel that strength now.
Yes.
Yeah, it's easier said than done, right? Yeah.
Oh, wow. Side note, it is my 40th birthday today. And as an adoptee, birthdays have been a challenge for me. I have often felt on my birthday a deep sadness, what I now know to be loss and grief, something that I couldn't put words to it for many, many years. And although that still comes up a little bit for me today, the good that is being done here outweighs any sadness and grief that I am feeling. And I have so much gratitude for this moment in time. It feels like everything in life can bring you to this moment in time in your life. And for me, I think that's a little bit what I am feeling and experiencing today. So I am centered and grounded now. I am not feeling so emotional, but we'll see. We're going to go there again because your words have just continue to.
And it's okay to be like that.
Thank you. Thank you. I also want to be able to do the job as well, right? Mm-hmm. So thank you. And okay. Nadine, can you give us a definition of what the 60 Scoop was? And I want to preface that with saying that when I did the documentary, I did a radio interview, and we called out to anybody that had been affected or impacted by adoption in any way, and just to the community, if there was anybody that wanted to come and share their story and their experience, then we would love to have them. And there was a 60 Scoop survivor that got in touch with me, and we met, and we sat down right by the Saskatchewan River with the Canadian flag right behind us flowing in the wind. And she expressed, because it was the summer of the 215 in Kamloops. It was 2021, August of 2021. And she expressed that all the residential school survivors are getting all this acknowledgement and this empathy from non-Indigenous Canadians. But what's happening for her was that she was a 60 Scoop survivor, and really she had been through a similar assimilation agenda, and she was just now coming back as an adult to the community and trying to reconnect. And she felt really unseen in her own story. So if you could speak to that, but also just go ahead and maybe start with what the 60 Scoop was for those that don't know.
Well, I'll share what it is from my perspective, because until the age of 40, I'd never even heard of it before. I was doing my master's at SFU and I was in a course that was an Indigenous cohort, which was an amazing experience. Different pedagogy. It wasn't about grades. It was about learning and thriving. And so we were asked to do an identity paper. And so I talked to Dr. Ethel Gardner, and I said, well, I don't know a lot about my identity because I'm adopted. And so she mentioned the word 60 Scoop and sent me off. And that was me understanding for the first time. And my adopted dad was in the military. We were very proud Canadians, very pro-Canada, supported the monarchy. So to learn that this was a deliberate act to remove me from my Indigenous home or my community, to strip me from my language and my culture and my identity, was an incredible assault to me as a person. It was like another harm done to Indigenous people. But I didn't have people to talk to about it because there were so many of us who didn't know we were products of the 60 Scoop, right? And so it took some time for me, and I don't know that I've done a lot of research about it. I know that it was a policy. The intent was to assimilate us. It was an extension of the 60s of the Indian Residential School Act, and it's still ongoing now. If you look at the number of Indigenous children in care, and it's quiet. It's not spoken about. It's not spoken about from Indigenous communities because I think sometimes there's some shame that we were taken from our communities and our families, and they didn't have the ability to stop that. because partially they were in their own grief as residential school survivors. So there's so much in it that we haven't had that voice. When I went home and when I talked to my uncle about it, he tries to understand, but I don't think he gets how it impacted me so much because I was so different from my very white adopted family, and I was not white. So for me personally, it's about being stripped of who I am and also feeling really devalued, that I was disposable, that I could just be given to a family. I was a foster child with my mom and dad for 4.5 years before I was formally adopted. I applied for a copy of something called my ward report, and that's the documents that the social workers keep while you're in care. And they were lost. When we transferred from a paper system to an electronic system, my papers were lost. My sister Rhoda's, my brother Gordon's, and like our papers were lost. Is that intentional? I don't know. So, but I wanted that because I wanted some accountability from the federal government. Did you check on the placement of this home? Did you check on me the 4.5 years I was in foster care? I want to know that you did that because I'm a human being. I'm a person. Someone had the responsibility to make sure I was placed in a good home. It's so incredibly personal that so many of us were put in these foster homes, and there was no measure to ensure that these were good homes. There was no follow-up with social workers to make sure that it was a good placement, it was a safe placement. And that's the part that angers me so much. And I think that's, for many 60s group survivors that I've talked to, it's why we feel like we didn't matter. And then when you look at the attention, and I don't diminish the pain and suffering that my birth mom, my uncle, and my aunties all went through residential schools, their stories are so horrific. It just seems sometimes, it's like our stories don't matter as much. And that's the sad part when we have two Indigenous mindsets. Like, why are we even competing for who suffered? Like, can we not share in the suffering? And I think that's beginning to happen. So at the last gathering I went to for our nation, they stood up for the first time, 60 Scoop survivors. So I got to come forward and stand up and be recognized as a 60 Scoop survivor. And I sobbed. First time in my life that has ever happened.
Wow.
So
what did that feel like for you?
Like my community finally gets it, gets my, maybe not my story, but they get that there was trauma even after residential schools. And if you talk to most elders, they will be able to talk to you about, how we were overrepresented in foster care and how many of our children were taken from homes and still happen. But to be stood up and recognized, it was like, wow, okay, so it's real. So my pain that I've carried for a long time, it's real, and I felt so good.
Nadine, can I ask you a question?
Mm-hmm.
In your family, how old were you when you were adopted? And as well, your siblings?
So my birth mother gave birth to 4 children. And one of them she was able to keep because she had married, my youngest brother, Patrick. And I was put into foster care. You saw the certificate of, yes. I can't even remember the name because it's painful to look at, but she signed a paper relinquishing me. And that happened when I was 10 days old. So she signed that paper. And surrender. Yeah.
Certificate of surrender.
I was surrendered. I had no voice in that. Yeah. And so I was put into foster care with the family who became my adoptive parents at 10 days. And they took me in because they were strong Roman Catholics at the time. And there was a plea for foster homes, particularly for Indigenous children. So they took me in. They had no intention of adopting. They had 6 of their own children.
Wow.
So, and I think they took me in to supplement their income. I don't think they had any knowledge that this whole thing was about stripping us of language, culture, and identity. I don't think they were part of that agenda at all. They just saw a kid with need and took me in. So my older brother, Gordon, was put into foster care and adopted. And I have just recently he recently passed away. I've met his sister. So we're connecting. My sister Rhoda, we have connected. And I'm connected to my younger brother, Patrick. He lives in Squamish, so we have more regular contact. So, and I think, for him, how hard that was, right? He had no idea we existed.
Yeah.
Right. And then I did a DNA test and recently found out that my birth father, I wasn't looking for my birth father. My adoption record said that he was a Manitoba Indian. So I just wanted to know what nation I was from. And my birth father was alive and he was not Indigenous. So he didn't know I existed. So this is what I think the federal government has to be responsible for. The amount of trauma they caused me and so many families, like my adopted family, my birth father's, and his daughters who I've met. Imagine being 86 and finding out you had a daughter you didn't know about.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
So they adopted me when I was 4.5 because they were moving from Alberta to BC, and I was still a ward of the court. So the social worker said, well, you can't take her because she's a ward of the court. And my mom said, she's a part of my family and I'm taking her. You can throw me in jail. Huh. And the social worker said, Mrs. McGuire, we don't have to throw you in jail. You could adopt her. So I remember them telling me about being adopted. And yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
you remember them telling you
yes.
about being adopted.
Yes. And I remember them saying that they had to go before a judge and he was going to make me part of their family forever. But the way I remembered it is that my real dad was a judge. So I would say to my brothers, like, don't mess with me because my real dad's a judge. And yeah. So I always knew that I was Indigenous or First Nation or Native or Indian, depending on what we've always been assigned. Yeah. It's the government who's given us these names. It's never been. So that's why I always say I am Shuswap, I am Secwepemc. When I do any presentations or workshops, I don't always say I'm Indigenous. I say my nation's name and then my community name. Yeah.
I still struggle with that because growing up, it was Indian and then it was Native. Then it was Aboriginal. It was,
yeah.
I know that one's not quite, I don't know.
There's so much controversy over Aboriginal.
That's what I've heard too. Yeah. And so we were chatting actually last night and I said, I still feel nervous at times. I feel like I need to really guard my tongue, especially when I'm around other Indigenous people, because I feel like I don't want to offend or hurt or say the wrong thing. And I'm still learning. And so for you to,
so an elder,
speak of that, that's
an
important.
elder told me, Kristal, and I think this is, Tina, you've probably heard this too. If you make a mistake and an elder corrects you or tells you off, that means they care enough to correct you so you don't make that same mistake again. And when I heard that, because I've been told off by elders, and it's embarrassing, and but it's because they care, right? So I wish there was a dummies for adoptees or a dummies for 60 scoop survivors, because there were a lot of these things. And Tina, I bet you can relate that faux pas we've made in our connections to our home communities. That how would we know? Yeah,
right.
So just mention your nation's name and then say, and so we have kinship terms, right? So when I go into a school or I'm doing a presentation for a business, I'll say my name, I'll introduce myself in my language, and I'll say I'm from the Secretmouth Nation, from the Shuswap Band. And then I would tell you who my mom and dad were. Then I would tell you who their parents were and who his parents were, and go back as far as I can. And there was a reason for that, right? Because it when I announced that publicly, it tells you my kinship terms. So you know what nation I'm from, oh. And we joke about this sometimes with young girls, like you want to make sure you don't marry your cousin. So if you're at a powwow and someone gets up and introduces themselves, right? You want to make sure if they're a Eugene, oh, darn, I'm related to you. I'm not going to waste my time on you. But those kinship terms were they were important for in terms of trading practices. Yeah. So they knew what territorial rights I had. So, but see, we don't get, again, we weren't taught that. Right.
Yes.
And so this is like the Secretmouth Nation. They used to have gatherings 4 times a year. And that's where a lot of my teachings have come from, because people like Tina and myself, who are 60 Scoop survivors, we didn't grow up in the culture. But a lot of my cousins who are my own age say, well, our dad went to residential school. He has some of the teachings. He doesn't know what teachings he has. Mm-hmm. But these events were held to help us take back that knowledge that was stripped away from us so long ago. Mm-hmm. So it's really interesting,
Yeah. Tina, why don't you go ahead and share with us, for you, what the 60 Scoop was, mm-hmm. is for you, what it means to be a 60 Scoop survivor.
So in 2018, the federal government announced a settlement for 60 Scoop. And I looked at the criteria and I said to myself, am I a part of this? And so the criteria was you're Indigenous, you're adopted or fostered in to a non-Indigenous home. And I think it even said European family. And between the time period, I believe 1957 to 1991, somewhere in that area. And I thought, I do fit that criteria, but I didn't think that I was part of it. I didn't think I was part of this 60 Scoop. So this settlement was announced in 2018, and we had approximately a year to apply for it. So within that year, I did research on what exactly the 60 Scoop was. What I found out is, so as Nadine said, it was kind of like a transition from residential school to 60 Scoop. The federal government wanted to continue to take Indigenous children out of their homes, to get the Indian out of them, to get their culture and tradition and language out of them, and to have them go into non-Indigenous homes. What they base that on is our lack of proper food. When our communities and our families, we go hunting, we go canning, we go fishing. So all of our cupboards and freezers are full of natural healthy foods. They looked at our cupboards as not having packaged food. So they said, they're starving. They're not being fed very well. When in actual fact, we're being fed better than the processed food. So then I found out that there is an agency created called AIM in 1967, and AIM stands for Adopt Indian Métis. It was federally funded. It was in Saskatchewan. And what they did is all the Indigenous children that they took out of their homes, they put them up for adoption, and they created TV commercials, newspaper ads, and radio ads. And when I found the newspaper ads, even now when I do presentations for 60 Scoop, even now when I show the TV ads, I get choked up as, I'm in one article, it said, the child is as normal as possible. One presentation I did, a teacher put up her hand. She goes, that looks like a catalog for the SPCA. And even just talking about it now, I still get choked up seeing the TV ads. So in my presentations, I show the ads and I pass around the TV ads. The AIM agency, I even found a letter online that shows this lady was salesperson of the year for AIM. So there was some children that were sold to the States as well. So the settlement is about loss of culture. And which is exactly, what we experienced. And I went onto Facebook and there were groups created for 60 Scoop survivors. And so that's how I met Nadine. And it's how I met a lot of my brothers and sisters today, meaning 60 Scoop survivor brother and sisters. And it was the first time that we could talk to other people and have them relate, because a lot of our lives, we kept everything inside. We had no one to relate to, no one to talk to. Growing up in a white privileged world and feeling out of place. And then sometimes our brothers and sisters will be connected with their community, and they're not all communities welcome them either, or their families. So I talk about being in the middle. So I know what it's like to be in this one world that I grew up in, and I'm now connected with my community. But I also see myself as a bridge, as us, we are bridged, because we know both communities, and we can kind of make a connection and talk about the history and our stories.
As you all know, my biological mother was a 60 Scoop survivor as well, is a 60 Scoop survivor. And I don't know if I've shared this with you yet, but her and her brother were both taken, put into foster care. And then at the age of 7 and 8, and then they were separated. And her brother was adopted to a family in the United States, and she was adopted to a family in Manitoba. So when she was in her 20s, her brother, who had been looking for her since she was taken, found her. And he was from the Opaskwayak Cree Nation. He grew up with their mother. And he knocked on her door one day and said, "Hey, I'm your brother." And they were reunited. And so that, I think, sort of spurred her on to go searching for her community and her family, her biological family. The reason why I share this is because she went searching for the brother that she was taken with and spent that time in foster care with, who was then adopted out to a family in the States. And when she went looking for him, she was told that he was dead. And so she grieved that. And when her and I connected, she said, "Well, you did have an uncle, his name was Norman, but unfortunately he's passed away." About 3 years ago, when I was on Ancestry, I was connected with this young woman who turned out to be a first cousin of mine. And guess who her father was? Norman. And he wasn't dead. He was, in fact, alive and living in Texas. And so I had the absolute honor and pleasure of reuniting. My biological mother with her brother, who she had grieved and missed and longed for her whole life. And yeah.
So that's where I feel the anger, like the harm that was done to your mom. There's been an apology, a formal apology to the 60 Scoop survivors. Some organizations are starting to say thrivers, because we don't want to be left in that trauma. I don't know that I'm ready to go always as thriver. It just, for me, that's the biggest part of all this, and that the apology was nice, but it felt insincere when you look at the process of the class action suit that was done for 60s group. It's appalling. It's just, and it's not even the amount of money, but there are circumstances where brothers and siblings in the same two people were accepted for the 60s group and one wasn't. And I don't know how many people I've spoken to whose paperwork was lost.
Yeah.
And so they couldn't prove, and the onus was on us to find that we were part of the 60s group, which is, grossly unfair because we can't, it was hard for us to phone our home communities when some of us didn't even know who our home communities were. So yeah, I think that the settlement has stirred up so much. I guess the positive thing about it is that it's helped people like us connect, but I think it's also done an incredible amount of harm.
Yes.
Because those people who were not accepted as the class here's another rejection. I'm not Indian enough to be a 60s group survivor. Like who gets to determine that?
Métis weren't part of the settlement.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I actually don't like to talk about the settlement because a lot of people will view that as you're only looking for the money. I took 2 weeks before the deadline, I did apply, but it took me a year to do it. I didn't feel that it was to take a check from the government and they were saying, sorry, we took you away from your family and traditions. Here's a check. I had friends say to me, take it, Tina, it's free money. How disrespectful to say that it was free money. And the whole process was horrible, the way they treated us through the settlement. The company that was doing the settlement weren't answering our emails, weren't answering our phone calls. Paperwork was going missing. It was delay after delay. And yes, it was the pandemic, but it was triggering. There was lateral violence within our group. And when I got that letter one day in the mail to say I was part of it, I just broke down like, I can't believe I was part of this genocide. I thought but we have connections now, brothers and sisters, and now we can talk about it.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you are.
Yeah. And, when you think about, like, there's a lot of, so in education, we have teachers. I didn't know about residential schools. I didn't know about the 60s group. You weren't intended to know.
Yeah.
This was done on the quiet. And the purpose behind residential schools and the 60s group is that if we're not connected to our home communities and our cultures, then the government doesn't have to honor treaties or have to continue negotiations with land claims and such. So that was the intent. And so when you peel back all those layers, it's not because they thought that we really needed better homes. They just wanted to take the Indian out of us. So we were one less barrier for them to rid themselves of land claims and treaty negotiations that they need to honor. And that's hard. That's super hard. And, the settlement came and went. How it was handled, there's been so much criticism. There was a foundation created. So we thought, a healing foundation. Yeah. Maybe we can go and get some counseling. Maybe they'll have some skilled counselors who can talk about, who have experience in the area of cross-cultural adoption. Nothing. Money has been spent to have committees or what I don't even. So it's a joke, right? And it's out there providing support for residential school survivors, but it's not to diminish the sufferings, but they have support. We need support that's tailored to what we experience. Yes. And each one of our stories is going to be so different, right? Yes. But there needs to be targeted support for 60s group survivors. And there's nothing out there that I know of.
34,000 people applied. 34,000 people
Wow.
applied. Just over 20,000 got approved. But there's many, like we discussed, that should have been approved that didn't. Many people came in after saying, you know, oh, I'm in Europe. I just learned about this. I'm in the States. I just learned, can I apply? No, like there was a 1 year deadline and that was it. So.
And if you didn't know about it, like if you were not on social media, if you didn't know you were a 60 Scoop survivor, because there were so many of us who didn't know, you know, and so, oh, your time's up. So you can no longer talk about your suffering because, you know, this was the cutoff date. Like it's.
But how was the awareness put out there?
I saw it on Facebook.
Yeah. I saw it in the news.
Lawyers put out, are you a survivor of the 60 Scoop? And I thought, what's that? You know, and then I remember the conversation with Dr. Ethel Gardner and I am. So what is this about? Because how would they contact us, right? Because...
Well, especially if there's no records.
Yeah. Those records would be closed. And you know, there are some kids who had a very closed adoption, some had open adoption. It varied, right? So unless you were, you know, so you think about people who are not social media savvy or don't have access to technology, which happens in a lot of our remote communities that don't have great internet connection. So they miss out. Or, you know, a lot of the survivors who were sent to the U.S. to work as farm hands and such, how would they know? And this is what's so wrong about it. So there's been lots of criticism about that there should never have been a cutoff date. There should never, and it really should be up to the government to provide that settlement. And the deal that was reached is appalling. But it was, I guess, you know, good things came out of it. We got to connect with each other. And there are some Kathy Wynn. What is Kathy's last name?
Strongwind.
Strongwind is an amazing advocate for 60 Scoop survivors. So look her up. Yeah. She houses the Facebook group for all across Canada. So she sends out information about gatherings for 60 Scoop survivors, support groups, healing circles. Most of them happen that I've seen that she posts in Winnipeg, but they will make their way out here. So, yeah.
Did your adoptive family help advocate for you, like during this time? Like
my adopted mom died when I was 27, and I had little or nothing to do with my adopted father after she died, and they wouldn't have known.
Yeah,
you know. Yeah,
both of my parents who raised me passed away in 2009 and 2010. So my birth father did get to meet my adopted parents, so that was good.
But even my home community, right? There were no one from my community reached out and said, hey, you should think, because I don't know how much they knew about it either. So, and I think that was partially the intent, wasn't it? Like,
I think like a lot of our communities and families, because they were attending residential school and dealing with their own healing and trauma, I've learned along the way there are a lot of elders that don't really know anything about the 60 Scoop. And it's not through ignorance. It's just we're finally getting our voices and talking about it. And so it wasn't really talked about within our community. So
when you think about how funding works too in community, right? Each band is allocated so much money. And so if we come home, that means funding that they have that is never enough to support the people in their own communities. We could be tapping into that for healthcare, for education, for housing. They can't provide what they need for their existing members. So the government dumped this on them too. So it's like a web.
Yeah.
A web of mess. And how do you untangle this? So, yeah, I wish our federal government would be more accountable And I wish there had been some kind of agency that we could have gone to that would have helped us go home for the first time, that would have prepared us, but also would have prepared our communities. You know,
Yes. Yeah.
my community has been good. My uncle has been amazing, but I've heard lots of stories where that they haven't been welcomed. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. When in the film, there's a funny part where I'm about to get the car all packed up and I'm going to my community for the very first time. And, I'm adjusting my purse and my director says, "Are you ready?" And I'm like, "I'm ready." And then it pans to the next shot of me sobbing. And I was like, I wasn't ready. I guess I wasn't ready. But what you don't see is that it was an hour drive, an hour and 20-minute drive from where we were staying to my community. And I had the most profound emotional breakdown because I didn't know what I was going to get when I got there. I didn't know if they were going to look at me and go, "You're not Indian enough to come back here," or "Look at you showing up with your cameras and you're here to exploit us." Or, I had all of those thoughts that I would be rejected. And the other piece of that too was this intense grief of what I had lost, and that I was going back to a place that could have been my home, a place that I could have grown up on, that I could have been with my community, and I didn't.
It's also overwhelming going back home.
Yeah.
Because we do feel when we're on our land and we feel our ancestors.
Yes. I couldn't, the peace that I felt when I was there, it really was such a profound experience. It was, thankfully, my community was just so welcoming and so lovely. And yeah, it really couldn't have gone in a better way for me. But, as you speak about the 60s scoop, Kristal and I, we've done a lot of episodes where we talk about relinquishment, adoption as a trauma, and the loss that occurs within adoption, and then having to live as an adopted person as a child and grow up, and all of the feelings and emotions and experiences that we really relate to. And I think we relate to you as well, because you were adopted. You are adopted. But the 60s scoop portion of it adds such an extra layer because of the intention behind it. And it's so deep. It's so deep.
And I think many of us are still trying to come to terms with it. So, and, like no two journeys are the same.
Yeah.
And we don't even have the vocabulary to unpack it. We don't have the emotional capacity in some respects to unpack it, because you were put in a home and you were taken care of. You had a roof over your head. Like, why are you so sad? You're doing better than, had you, so there's so much, right? Like,
Yeah.
Do I have a right to grieve? I'm alive. I have a good job. I have a master's degree. So why am I so upset? I was on a teachers we love. We've been on strike a few times in my career, and I was on picket duty. And I could picket at a school that was close to where I lived. So I went to a school that was near my home. And so they didn't know who I was. And this counselor, I don't even remember, I choose not to remember his name, started talking about a newspaper article that was in the paper about a development that had to stop because they found some Indigenous remains on the land. And he said, I won't say the exact swear words he used, that this was because how they find a couple of bones and now they're going to halt the development for 3 years. What about the developers? What if that was my land? Can they say I can't have my land anymore because they found a couple of bones? And I said to him, like, if this were your grandparents or your mother, father, would you feel the same? He says, they're dead, they're bones. Why would you care? And I said, well, because those remains may impact future land claims. They may prove that Indigenous community lived or hunted in that area. So it may support Indigenous communities in terms around land claims. And he said, well, you guys, you can't claim land. You don't even know where your true communities were. And he escalated and escalated and escalated. And a kindergarten teacher, bless her heart, stepped in and told him to stop, that what he was doing was racist. And it gave me a chance to kind of step back and catch my breath. And and he said, but look at you, like, you're not Indian. I said, I am Indian. I have vitiligo. My pigment is dying. I grew up in a white home, but look at you, you're a teacher. So it couldn't have been that bad.
Why do you think that the 60 Scoop still isn't very well known within, Canada, within even, as you said, within some of the communities?
Well, I think because we haven't had a forum as 60 Scoop for, I think we talked about this, right? That we have not had a forum to come together. We didn't know that we were 60 Scoop survivors. So that's a big part of it. I think what's changing is that, at least in British Columbia, is the curriculum has changed, right? And so I'm now, I've written some books myself, and I wrote books because I never saw myself in books, right? So it's kind of cool to have the chance to do that. But with the curriculum change, I'm now seeing books about 60 Scoop survivors who are writing. Tina, you were telling me about the Salmon and Bannock.
Inez Cook.
And has written her story. So as we come forward,
Colleen Cardinal as well.
As we come forward and share our stories and do things like this is why this interview is so important, because it gives voice. And so the quality of resources around residential schools are amazing. As a teacher, like if I could start teaching now, it would have made such a difference. And they're written by Indigenous people, not about Indigenous people. So Tina has shared with me someday she wants to put pen to paper to write her story. And I know I do too. And I want to do it for different grade levels, so that because I think if we educate our young ones in schools, they will know the whole true history of Canada. So that's, I think, the movement that's going forward. Murray Sinclair said in one of his most profound videos is that education got us into this mess. Education is going to get us out, but it's not an easy fix. So he talks about the 7 generations. So he said 7 generations of families went through residential school. And it's going to take 7 generations for the healing to happen.
Yeah.
So I think, when you talk about this, we want healing to happen now. But I think, like, this is why your work is so important, because you're giving a forum for people to come forward.
Yeah.
And when people watch this and other film producers watch this, they'll think, oh my God, why didn't we know about this, right?
It seemed as though if the residential school, like the findings in 2021 hadn't occurred, that the 60 Scoop story still couldn't have been heard. Like, it felt as though the residential school, that those findings began to open up Canadians' eyes and compassion for Indigenous people. And I believe, and maybe I'm totally wrong, but I feel like it created a fertile soil for more Indigenous issues and experiences like the 60s Scoop to have a landing place for people who really didn't know anything about the intentional assimilation agenda.
I will say that we're talking about 60 Scoop now. If you knew me before 215, then you know I've been talking about this since I found out about it myself in 2018. I think we are talking about it now because us survivors are finding our voice and learning about our trauma and healing. And there's some of us who can talk about it, who have the strength and the healing to talk about it now. Some of our brothers and sisters are still on a healing path, and some of them haven't made it to this far. So we've been blessed by our ancestors to have voices to talk about it now. So now I go into, I do presentations. I go into schools, middle schools, high schools. I've done sharing circles with Surrey Police Service. I've done, a Zoom presentation to teachers at SFU. So there's a lot of people getting more education about the history and about my story, but I talk about stories in general about my brothers and sisters, and then how to be an ally with their Indigenous community in general after learning about, residential school, after learning about 60 Scoop. How can you be an ally to us? For instance, powwows are public. Not everyone knows this. They'll say, "Hey, Tina, are you going to the powwow? Can I come with you?" I'm like, "Sure, but you can actually go on your own." They're like, "Oh," so just getting the knowledge out there, about the missing and murdered Indigenous Women's Memorial March every Valentine's Day across Canada. There's one in downtown Eastside. I go every year. Be an ally. Come and support us, down there. So learn about whose land you're on. Learn about the community. Learn maybe possibly about the language. But it's good to be an ally, to say, to stand up against racism, but also be a part of our community and get to know our culture and traditions as well.
And you were talking earlier too about what was it about 215 that changed the direction? Why it generated empathy? And I think because they were talking about 215 children who died, whose remains may be on that residential school, which is where my auntie went. It humanized it, I think, for the first time. And I think children could relate to it when they heard, and it got so much press release. And I think social media has had a huge part in it too. I think we have some amazing Indigenous reporters out there who are trying to give voice. So, but I think it was when you think about children dying at a place where you go to school, there aren't supposed to be a graveyard at a school. Do you know any public school that has a graveyard? Right? So it's humanized it. And so
there's been talk years about residential school. For some reason, there needed to be that physical evidence that children died at school, and that's 215. And I look at those 215 children and what they've done. You've talked about how now we're talking about 60 Scoop, what they've done to Indigenous community as a whole. What they've done, Canada is now listening. We're having more voice being within the Indigenous community. But I talk often in my presentations about the 215 and the voices they've given to themselves and to all of us. My mom, she attended the Kamloops Indian Residential School, and she even worked there. And when she became pregnant with me, she gave me up for adoption so I wouldn't have to attend the residential school. And I can't imagine being a mom myself, the sacrifice to give up your child so she wouldn't have to go through the horrors that she went through.
Yeah.
I mean, those, the children there, the remains, it's like they've been a beacon. It's also raised notice to UNDRIP, the United Nations of Rights for Indigenous Peoples. So it's perfect storm isn't the right word, but it's raised attention not only in Canada, but I'm seeing in the U.S. now they're talking about the Indian residential school boarding schools that they had, right? So those the children who died at residential schools has elevated this platform, and so the impact they've had for us as survivors, our parents who were residential school survivors, if they knew the impact they were going to have, I think it might give them some comfort. It was amazing. I have friends who live in Kamloops, and that's where we had one of the gatherings for Secwepemc Nation there. So to be on that site, the first time that I went on a medicine trip with my uncle, we went to Kamloops for a medicine workshop, and to think, wow, this is where my auntie went to residential school, but we're having cultural happenings here. He showed me a kukuli, which is a pit house, which is what we would have lived in the winter months. So this place that caused so much harm is now a place that's educating people. It's where the powwow grounds, the Kamloops powwow happens there every year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's light.
Yes. So Tina, what would you say to people who when they hear about residential school, they automatically shut off and say, "Oh, I know all about that. Yeah, I've heard all about that." What would you say to that? And have you experienced that in your workshops that you've done?
No, I haven't. When I did the sharing circles with Surrey Police Service, my introduction is, I'm an Indigenous woman sitting in front of law enforcement. And some of them would nod their heads like, yeah, you are. It is a big step for an Indigenous person and an Indigenous woman to be talking with law enforcement because of my own personal experience with them and because of our history. We were taken from our homes by RCMP to go to residential school. We were taken by RCMP as part of the 60 Scoop. The ongoing MMIW, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, how there isn't the same media coverage for when an Indigenous woman or girl goes missing as there for others. I'd say mostly people are listening that haven't had personal comments to me about, I've heard all that. We're kind of still in the truth part of truth and reconciliation. So people are still listening. And there's still a lot to be told. But it's good that we're listening, that they're listening. I always welcome people. When I do my presentations, I said, I grew up in your world. I grew up in the white privileged world. The questions that you have, I once had as well. So feel free to ask me anything. I'm pretty non-judgmental. And I had the same questions as you. There's only been a couple of times where someone's asked me a question. I'm like, that's not appropriate. But other than that, I'd like to be open and to try and answer the questions as I can. So
let's talk about the idea of blood quantum and this obsession of asking Indigenous people what their percentage is.
I mean, growing up, I was always because I was probably one of two Indigenous kids at school. I was always asked, "What's your nationality? What's your nationality?" And when I would tell them I said I'm Indian back then. There was always the question of how much Indian are you? And I was always proud to say I'm 100%. It is disrespectful to ask anybody what percentage Indigenous you are, what percentage Native you are, because I don't recall ever asking my non-Indigenous friends, well, how much German are you? Or how, so forever, it seems like it seemed acceptable to ask how much percentage are you? It's not, it's disrespectful.
Stop doing it.
And elders will tell you, as long as your community accepts you and acknowledges you, they don't ask you to quantify
Mm-hmm.
your
Mm-hmm.
indigeneity.
Yeah.
And there are people who are by blood quantum 100% Indigenous, but are not connected to their culture, their community. Does that make them more Indigenous to me because they have more blood quantum? So, yeah. So don't ask. Yeah. It's rude.
I love that. I love that we get to say that. I think we're going to start to wrap up this episode, but don't worry. We have a second part to this episode where Nadine is going to share her own personal story and Tina will do the same. But to end this episode, could the both of you, you've brought some special mementos with you today. And Nadine, could you go ahead and just share first what it was that what you have there?
My earrings are made by my cousin, Megan Eugene. And I needed to feel, pardon me as I bang the mic, I needed to feel family strength. So I have her earrings on. Mm-hmm. And this is a shawl that I made in a workshop. And I call it kind of my mom's story or my family's story. So my mom gave up 3 children and was able to keep one. So Gordon is Black. He's my brother who's passed away, was first adopted. I'm red because I love red. And Rhoda is blue, my sister who was also adopted. White represents my mother, and she's on the outside because she wraps us. And Patrick is my younger brother who grew up with my mom. So they had that closeness together. And when you think of circle pedagogy in Indigenous culture, if you put this together, we are wrapped around together as a family again. And what weaves us together is that we've all come home. We've all come back to our Secwepemc Nation and our community. So I see this as kind of my family blanket. I also bought an eagle feather that my uncle gifted me, and we used that to smudge this morning. And I bought a drum that I made. So these are just all things, not to show, but just to give me comfort. And that I'm sharing all of their stories too. So thank you for asking that.
Yeah, I love that you said that actually, because my adopted mom, my mom passed away, and I often wear pieces of jewelry that she wore because it makes me feel close to her. So, and it makes me feel like I have a piece of her with me, you know? Yeah, I love that. Tina.
My mom made me this choker, and she gave it to me not long after we met in 2012. And it's needs to be fixed. You know, it's a bit warped and worn out, but I wear it to events and I wear it when I do presentations because I feel she's with me, giving me strength and helping me with a voice.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Until next time, we will be back and hear your beautiful stories. Great episode. Hey, Kristal.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing your stories and education. It's going to change a lot of people's perception. And it's a story of, like you said, coming home. And I'm grateful to be witness.
Thank you, Kristal.
Thank you, Kristal.
Thank you, Nadine. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you.
Kuksjatchum in my language, and I raise my hands to you for providing this forum.
Thank you for joining us today on the Because She's Adopted podcast. Please like and subscribe. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Leave a rating and review wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll see you next time.